TV, TV, and more TV next with David Sundstrom on this episode of Some Cereal for Dinner podcast. Joining me today on Some Cereal for Dinner podcast. I'm your host, DNC. So glad you could make it. Today's a really special episode because I've got a really cool guest on who runs a YouTube channel where on that YouTube channel he talks about television shows of all genres and varieties, from the boomer generation all the way up through Generation X. He kind of, a lot of it deals around with the 70s and 80s, but really good stuff. And he's somebody I've been following for a really long time. His name's David Sundstrom. And I'm going to apologize in advance, David, if I'm mispronouncing your name. I know you told me how to pronounce it when I had you on the show, but if I mispronounce it, I ask for grace that you'd just forgive me in mispronouncing your name. But I wanted to take a moment to introduce the show because we had some technical difficulties. As a matter of fact, even right now, as you can hear, I'm at home. We have people here working on my house. And so I decided to move, and we had internet problems too. It was all kinds of stuff going on. But anyway, long and short of it is that there was technical problems, and those technical problems ate into the program a little bit, so it wasn't quite as long as a program as I wanted to have. But Dave assured me that he would be on again. It was a great conversation talking about television shows of basically the late 70s, even early morning cartoons, and a little bit in 90s and a little bit even today. So enjoy the program. But before we go to the program, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And share this on your favorite social media. It would really mean a lot to me. Also, if you're wanting to go that one extra step and donate to the program, there's a link in the description below to Buy Me a Coffee, which is just a page in which you can donate to the program if you want to see upgrades here in the studio, and actually working towards getting a studio right now. So every little bit helps, and I really appreciate it. And now on to the show to talk to Dave. Let's start. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on Some Cereal for Dinner podcast. I've got somebody here that I've been following for quite a while, and he records on his own YouTube channel. Now, I know your first name's David, and I know how to spell your last name, David, but I have no idea how to pronounce your last name. I'm not even going to try. So go ahead and tell me what your last name is.
It's Sundstrom.
Sundstrom. Okay. Now, you know what? I knew that, David, but I was afraid that I was going to butcher it. You know what I mean?
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. And call me Dave.
Dave. Okay. Dave sounds good. So, Dave, I've actually been following your channel for a while. I had another YouTube channel where, you just like listen to music and watch stuff before I opened this channel. And, you're really, skyrocketing as far as your views and as far as your content. You seem to put up content all the time. And you talk about stuff that I am just highly interested here, a lot of retro things. And that's what this channel is about. It's about growing up Generation X and what we saw on TV and the music we listened to and all that stuff. And you seem to really captured a lot of, especially the television shows and the actors. What got you into this? What got you started on this?
Oh, I'm just a geek. I totally a geek, and I've watched lots and lots of television growing up. Right when other kids were out hanging out with their buddies on Friday and Saturday nights, up until 18, 19, 20, I was more likely to be at home home on a Friday night watching Incredible Hulk and Dukes of Hazzard. That was my idea of a good time. And Saturday nights it was Love Boat and Fantasy Island. So the old man used to call me a couch potato, and it was a nickname that was well deserved in our home.
Did you resent that nickname, or did you just like embrace it?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know. So right now I embrace it, right? I think that's great. And I realize that there are so many other things that one could be called by your father. I would set my alarm for 6 a.m. and I would get up super early and watch the cartoons, and my butt would be firmly planted on the couch until 10:30. Except for when I would get up and go grab a bowl of cereal, which is an important part of Saturday mornings as well.
That's a super important Saturday morning ritual. Your Saturday morning
Absolutely.
Cartoons and all that stuff. You've got to have that bowl of cereal in front of you while you're watching your Saturday morning cartoons. Speaking of Saturday morning cartoons, what were some of your favorite cartoons that you enjoyed watching?
Oh, without a doubt, my all-time favorite, being a superhero geek, was the Super Friends.
Oh yeah, right.
So from I think it was 73 or 74 on, there was a brief break for 1 year where ABC, they weren't sure if they were going to continue on, but for about a decade, starting in those mid 70s on, Super Friends were on ABC on Saturday morning, and there were various iterations, or what it was called towards the end. But I love that show, there was the first year was probably my favorite, and that was the one with Marvin and Wonder Dog, and is it Jane? No, that's Zan and Jane, and Marvin, Wendy, and Wonder Dog.
Yeah, right. I remember that
Really loved
very
those
well.
hour-long cartoons. They were big adventures. The interesting thing about those early Super Friends episodes was that there really weren't many bad guys. Typically they were just misguided scientists, and at the end of the day, everybody would be friends and important lessons were learned.
I remember at the end of those things, the guy, the villain would always kind of come to his senses and be like, "Oh my gosh, I can't. Is there anything you can do?" And the superhero, whoever it was, Superman or Batman, would always say, "The only thing I can really do is make sure that you have a fair and speedy trial." Remember that?
I do.
That was like at the end of almost every one of those. I was a big Super Friends fan myself.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I was a big Super Friends fan myself. Now you bring up some very interesting things on your channel, stuff that I kind of want to get into and talk about the evolution of the television show in any format, in any genre, as far as like it can be the cop show, or the sitcom or something like that. There are lots of how it developed over time. I remember can I ask real quick how old you are, if you don't mind me asking, if that's a big deal for you or no?
Mid-50s. Let's go there.
You're mid-50s.
So I straddle baby boomers and Gen X.
Okay. So
right there at the tail end of both.
The tail end of one and the beginning of the other. Do you feel like you identify?
Yeah, tail end of the boomers and the beginning of the Gen Xers. It depends. I mean, when I'm talking to folks about the Andy Griffith Show and things like that, that's probably solid baby boomer conversation, even though, I mean, a lot of Gen Xers watched it in the mid 70s when it was in reruns and syndication.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. When I grew up watching television, it wasn't just what was out at the time, it was also the reruns. So I grew up watching the Andy Griffith Show and the Beverly Hillbillies and things like that. I kind of didn't, when you get into some of the more like Father Knows Best, I really didn't watch too much of that. Or what was that show where the lady was a housekeeper? I can't remember, Mabel or something. What's that?
Hazel. Hazel.
Hazel. Hazel.
Hazel.
That's it. Hazel.
Hazel.
Yeah. I totally remember. Well, I remember watching it, but I really
Yeah, it
wasn't
sounds like we're in the same place.
right. So tell me a little bit about. I did a video called Mr. Belvedere Taught Me About AIDS and other lessons I learned from 1980s sitcoms. Do you remember, and it wasn't just sitcoms, do you remember, and it really kind of happened in the 80s, because before the 80s, I don't remember it. I don't remember it being, being so issue driven. But do you remember those shows where like every show had some lesson in it about, stewardship or something like that? What were some of those shows that you remember that had moral lessons to them?
Well, I think the show that was probably guilty of that most often, and guilty is the wrong word, but used that trope most often, was Different Strokes. And the episode that comes to mind is the Gordon Jump episode, where he appears to be someone who he very much isn't. And I don't want to go into all sorts of details, but he's someone who preys on young children,
Oh
right?
yeah,
And
I remember that.
and it was playing against type for Gordon, who was but he should do, because he wanted that message for kids and parents to see that message. And so, but there were lots of them like that on Different Strokes. Kimberly coming of age, becoming more of a young woman. Todd Bridges when he was dating Janet Jackson, and lessons learned there. And you're right, you didn't see that all that much in the 70s with shows like Laverne and Shirley, Happy Days. And I mean, MASH was message heavy, but in a different way. But when you got into the 80s, it seemed like, that all of those shows. What was the Alan Thicke show? That show had a ton of them too. I'm trying to remember the name
Growing
of that
Pains.
show.
Growing Pains.
Growing Pains, yes, with Kirk Cameron. And that was another show that had a lot of those messages. But Different Strokes is the one that I probably watched. I was right at the point where I was kind of moving out of teens into young early 20s, and less television watched for a period of time. But I love that show, and that's one you'll hear me talk about from time to time.
Which one?
Different Strokes.
Different Strokes. Okay, I wasn't sure if you meant Different Strokes or Growing
Or
Pains.
Growing Pains, yeah.
Yeah, Family Ties got into it too.
Yes.
My uncle was an alcoholic, or there was a death, and now we have to go through grief counseling, and Alex
sure
does
did.
drugs, and
yeah.
Those were kind of cool. So do you feel your cutoff point was really kind of 90s? Do you feel like after you get to the 90s, you're really kind of dealing with a different era?
I think at that point, broadcast television was starting to see the writing on the walls in terms of the 3-4 major networks, and programming became different. There's still good shows out there. We watch the Goldbergs, every week when it's not in reruns. And there was a show on CBS a few years ago called Me, Myself, and I that was great. It was canceled after I think it ran the full 13 episodes, but it was canceled after the 6th or 7th episode. So there are still good shows out there, but you're right. I mean, you get to the Friends and Seinfeld era, which I appreciate both of those shows and watched them when they were during their first runs on primetime, but definitely different. And the best way to describe it is that they felt somewhat less innocent than what we used to watch on TV.
That's definitely the case. I feel as though there's kind of two shows that kind of did an outro. There may have been more, but you get to that era where you were learning all these lessons, but it was very fragmented. You were introduced to characters you were never introduced to again. They were just there to teach you the lesson. You got Tootie's boyfriend who couldn't read, and you never you never heard from him again. You know what I mean? It was one of those things. And I think that there were two shows that kind of put an end to that, at least in the popular front. And that was Seinfeld, number one, where you started getting more continuity between episodes and less of, oh, we're going to tackle the issue of illiteracy, or we're going to tackle the issue of drug abuse or whatever. And then the other one was Married with Children, which was just the anti-family show. And so I loved both of them, actually. And I loved all of them for what they were but I don't know if you're like me, but like at the time, I didn't really notice it. Like I didn't really notice the message. It wasn't until I went back and watched it, I'm like, man, this is a message in every single episode.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's nothing like putting a couple decades between you and a program to really recognize kind of the way things changed and the impact they had on the entertainment industry. I'm with you though. I loved both of those programs. Seinfeld, I just thought that cast, and that's what it had in common with some of the great shows and sitcoms of the past, is that main cast with Michael Richards and Seinfeld and Jason, what's Jason's last name? And Julie Louis-Dreyfus.
Yeah, I forgot, Jason.
Yeah.
It slipped my mind.
Well, I'll remember it as soon as we're done. But
me too. Did you either love or hate Married with Children?
Loved it.
Oh.
Loved it. Married with Children. So I was working in retail overnight. And one of the nights I would work was I was working at a Kmart. I'll just say that, and stocking shelves overnight. And one of the shows, they'd lock me in because Kmart would close early at like 6 p.m. on Sundays. They'd lock me into stock shelves, and I would always take a break. I think it was around 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock that Married with Children was on Fox. And I'd go over to the Kmart Appliance Center, and I'd have Married with Children on all the television sets there and watch it as I was during my first break, which ran a little long because Married with Children's a half-hour show. But again, a talented cast, and the Bundy family. It's one of those things where, yeah, they were dysfunctional, and it was the complete opposite of Make Room for Daddy and some of those shows that we saw in the 60s. But they loved each other in their own crazy, rotten way. And there was, in some ways, even though it was exaggerated in Mad Magazine kind of plots, there were elements of truth to what was going on with Alan Pegg and Kelly and Bud.
It was kind of the exaggerated, but very rooted in reality to some television shows for sure. But I mean, it was like a characteristic. You look at somebody who has like a character. But it's the reason why it's pronounced is because there's a reality to it. So was there any? Listen, I had this experience that happened to me when I was starting this channel on some cereal for dinner, where I thought about kind of going over all kind of genres of growing up Generation X. And one thing that happened to me was there was a few shows that I was really super into as a kid. I thought they were the coolest shows. And I went back and I was just like, this is the cheesiest show I have ever watched. And one of them for me was 21 Jump Street. I started watching 21 Jump Street again because I wanted to do a show about like cop shows of the 80s, 70s and 80s. And I just could not believe, the I don't know, the cheesy plot and that kind of thing. Have you experienced that? Do you have something that you remember like, oh man, that was the best show, and then you go back and you still love it, but you're kind of like going, I can't believe I was actually ever even into that show.
So two things. One is I think I mentioned to you in an email as one of the things I like to do is occasionally people will post like old VHS tapes that they have that they're just giving away or they're selling super cheap, and I'll go and grab them and I'll see if I can catch some gems, something that can be uploaded to YouTube that no one's ever seen before, whether it's a local news broadcast or a really rare commercial. But one of those videotapes was 21 Jump Street from the 80s, a first run 21 Jump Street with all the commercials. And it was with Richard Grieco as Booker. And holy cow, you were so right about it's just so cheesy. And I can see where it's still cool, but it's definitely it represents the 80s really well, or the late 80s or early 90s. I can't remember when that came out. My show would be TJ Hooker.
Oh, yeah.
Which I went back and watched a few episodes of that not too long ago. I think it's on Tubi where I watched it. Anyway, man, oh man, is Shatner's acting just the worst in that show? It's just William Shatner to, amplified, and all the mannerisms and weirdness. And then the plot's your standard plot from, your crime drama from the 70s. And it was one of those things where I was watching it going, this is not as cool as I remember. But at the same time, I was thinking to myself, but I still love it so much.
Yeah.
And that's definitely the case with not only TJ Hooker, but a bunch of shows from that era. We're spoiled because production values and just the quality of the writing and direction and everything on television today, it's really up to a standard that's close to motion picture level. And it wasn't back then. They very much churned and burned that stuff out, and those actors worked really hard, as did everyone involved with those programs. But you just see a difference from now to looking back to then. And I think you just have to, like you said, and I said it too, you just love it anyway for its cheesiness, and just recognize that there was still, even though it may feel a little cheesier than the shows we watch now, there was a lot of love and hard work put into those shows as well.
Yeah, there certainly was. And TJ Hooker was one show that I watched when it was out. And I have not yet gone back to watch that yet. It's one of those things that I want to go back to do, because I do want to do an episode on, the cop shows of that era. But another show that was a lot of fun was The Fall Guy. Have you had a chance to go back and watch any of those shows?
I have. That one actually holds up a little better. Maybe it's just that I'm such a Lee Majors fan. Of course, you got Doug Barr and Heather Thomas in that. And, that's a great supporting cast.
Right.
We just talked about the two Heathers. You had Heather Locklear and TJ Hooker, and Heather Thomas and Fall Guy. And boy, they captivated, I think, young teenage boys'
imaginations,
minds era. Actually, is one of those actors who I never get tired of watching, whether it's $6 Million Man, The Fall Guy, or any other project that he's been involved in. And there was such humor with that show too. And I really like that show. I'm a big fan of a lot of Glenn Larson's. I think Glenn Larson's shows actually hold up a little better than like some of the spelling crime dramas that we watched in the 70s. But again, I might be just a little biased. Someone else might feel completely different.
Maybe a little biased. Do you think, I always, looking back, I don't really know too many shows that kind of define or change eras. I kind of talked a little bit about Seinfeld and a little bit about Married with Children, because I was a little older by the time those came out, and I could see noticeably the difference in substance matter and difference in continuity. But as you're looking at the 70s, and this is just speculation because I have no idea, but it seems to me like Three's Company really turned a corner as well, as far as defining the genre of the sitcom for that time, for kind of things that came before and maybe kind of things that came after that. I don't know. I think they, they wrestled with maybe some taboo subjects that other people weren't wrestling with at the time. Would you amend that in any way, or would you add to that, or how would you feel about Three's Company? And this was one of my favorite shows.
Well, I love Three's. Yeah, I love Three's Company. It was banned in the Sundstrom home growing up, and only for the first few years. Eventually, I think my parents realized that there wasn't all that much horrible going on with the show. Although it did, you're right. I mean, the fact that Jack pretended to be gay was, at least in our home, initially that was something like, they just didn't, my parents didn't want to have those conversations. They wanted to pretend that everything was the world of Father Knows Best. And as a result, there was some trepidation. But I really did love the show. It pushed some boundaries, but in other ways it didn't. It really was more innocent, even though there was some titillation, to use that word. And, every episode there was a misunderstanding, right? In Three's Company. And so, it took the whole episode for everybody to figure out what really happened. That was a common theme that show had. I would amend it a little bit. I think the sitcoms really changed with Norman Lear in the early 70s. And and he pushed boundaries just like Three's Company did. But the difference was that Lear was trying to change people's minds about things. And he had a bit of his own political agenda and his set of beliefs that he were very much woven into the tapestry of those programs like Maude, All in the Family, those Norman Lear shows that we saw in the early 70s. Three's Company pushed the boundaries a little bit in that they had this subject matter where Jack was, at least initially. As later seasons, there wasn't a lot of that pretending to be gay stuff. It was very clear that Jack was a ladies' man and really did it.
From Mr. Furley in the very
But they didn't have any sort of political agenda, really. It was zany comedy at its absolute finest, somewhat mindless, but you had such great actors again, right? You had John Ritter, Joyce DeWitt, Suzanne Summers, and then Norman Fell and Audra Lindley, only to be replaced. And, you can argue who was the better set of landlords, although Mr. Furley really wasn't a landlord. He was just living in a room, taking care of the place. His brother was the landlord. But, Don Knotts. Yeah. I am forever, he's my favorite comedic actor, and John Ritter's right up there with him.
Yes.
So you have those two folks together in one situation comedy. I don't care what material they have. They can read a phone book and I'm probably going to end up laughing.
For sure. I was really kind of, not happy when Suzanne Summers left the show. That was actually one of, some of my earliest memories, and really, starting to develop my own sense of humor came from Three's Company. That was really, a big deal for me. And then that misunderstanding type of comedy, which, recrops up in even like Friends. Friends has a lot of misunderstanding stuff, where somebody is just, this person thinks he's going to be here, or we're hiding this from this person or whatever, it was hilarious. I was a little devastated. I don't dislike any of the other two girls, Cindy or Terry, that came along later. But for me, that original Three's Company with Suzanne Summers was my absolute favorite run of the show. I don't know how you feel about the other two or whatever.
They were fine. They were adequate replacements, and that makes it sound like they weren't good. They were good. They did what they had to do. They came in. It's too bad that Suzanne left the show, because you're absolutely right. The casting was perfect right from the get-go.
Yeah, for sure. And then when you got Cindy, you got kind of like an exaggerated version of what Suzanne Summers was supposed to be.
That was important, right? Because what had happened was there were scripts that were already written, and they literally had to just cross out Chrissy's name and put Cindy's in there, make some minor changes, but they needed Jenny Lee to come in and literally be a Chrissy substitute, because the scripts were already written. Now, later on, as they brought in, I'm trying to remember the name of the actress who played Terry, but when they brought her in, they could write new scripts, and her character, that's why her character was not dramatically, but different than that of Chrissy or Cindy, who was, to your point, Ian, just an exaggeration of Chrissy.
Right, right. And of course you can't just say, well, we're just going to do, everything Suzanne Summers does. You have to change it in some way. And so I
Yeah.
think with Cindy, they kind of, went the exaggeration route, and with Terry, they went the smart blonde route. Instead of the dumb blonde route, they went the smart blonde, the one who's a nurse and has education behind her and stuff like that. And I just remember that episode where Jack is not on board with with what Cindy is doing, and he finally at the very he's trying to play pranks on her, and he finally at the very end he sprays himself down with this. I know that you have to go here, so I want to be respectful of your time, and I appreciate what you're, helping, being on my program at all is
Oh,
just
no problem.
I really appreciate that. But I have to say too that I was really disappointed that at the very end that Jack and Janet did not get together. I was super disappointed.
That was a miss on the part of the creators of the show. I know that they really, that was based on a British sitcom, and they made the decision to follow there was a sequel to, or a spin-off to the British sitcom called, trying to remember, was it Robin's Nest? I think was what it was called. And that became Three's a Crowd. So they just followed the template, whereas I think Three's Company had become its own show. It really didn't need to follow the template that the British shows, the original shows, had done, and it would have been much better in my mind. I think there were a lot of fans out there that felt like there was a little, there was never a lot on the show, but a little bit of a spark there. And Joyce and John were such engaging actors. It would have been fun to see them carry on. And I know just from reading some articles that Joyce was a little hurt with the way they married her off quickly in the end and got rid of her.
Yeah, that's a bummer. That's a bummer. Well, again, I know you have to get going here. I could sit and talk about this for a while. We'll have to do this again because this is a really good conversation. Maybe we got a little bit more time. This was really great to talk with you. I feel like we're kind of cut out of the same bolt of cloth.
Absolutely.
Let me just ask you this one final question.
Sure.
Is there any television shows today that are out today that has surprised you, that you've gone, wow, this really, is as good as everything I remember?
Yeah. So I mentioned Goldberg's. I love Goldberg's. I laugh and laugh. My youngest son watches that show. We have all of the episodes DVR'd. So just goes back and just watches them over and over. And I love it because, one, it's set in the 80s, and it doesn't make a lot of sense chronologically sometimes in terms of, highlight a movie that came out before an episode. It just, timing doesn't quite work sometimes, but it's all about the 80s, and it's so much fun to see. Occasionally you'll see actual videos that the real Adam F. Goldberg had incorporated into making of the TV series, and it's fun. And he'll bring back like kids that are part of the plot. He'll bring the grown-ups back as actors in the episode. So we love that. It's clever. It's well done. I was surprised. I'm surprised it's ran as long as it has. It just, typically shows don't run that long, but that's great. We're looking forward to another season of that. The other one for me is Stranger Things on Netflix.
Okay.
I've talked a lot about that, but I absolutely love Stranger Things, and in particular, the first season, which, first seasons are always the best, but that show blew me away in terms of just creativity, genuine suspense, and still, again, it's callbacks to the 80s all over the place on that show. And certainly that's an era that I'm very, very fond of.
Me too, my friend. Okay, well, tell everybody where they can find you online.
Yeah, just I think at this point you can just type Dave Sundstrom into Google, and I'm likely to be the very first thing that pops up. And YouTube, type in Dave Sundstrom, and my channel will be right there. But I love love having had this conversation with you. I feel like we are definitely birds of a feather, my friend. And I wish you the very best of luck with your channel and your podcast. And don't hesitate to reach back out. And I'd love to engage in another conversation with you in the future.
I'm going to take you up on that for sure, because this conversation was too short. We had some technical difficulties at the very beginning. And this is, again, something that you and I could talk about for a while. And I think by extension, other people that came up in this era would be interested in hearing. So thanks a lot, Dave. And we will talk to you again soon. Take care.
Take care. See ya.
Hey, everyone. I just wanted to thank you once again for tuning into some Cereal for Dinner podcast. Please take a moment to like and subscribe, leave a comment, and share this on your favorite social media. It would really mean a lot to me. And go that extra step and buy me a coffee in the link below. And if you like this video, well, you might like these videos as well.